When I was 19, I was in the Marines and had stupidly used my military perks to get a home loan and bought my first house. I moved a barracks room worth of stuff into this place that seemed to me like a palace. Of course, I went out and bought some bar stools, a futon to sleep on until I got a real bed, and some used coffee tables for my TV. I also had my dog with me. As I was unpacking my meager belongings in the living room, I noticed a car had pulled into my drive and blocked me in. I walked out, and there stood a man offering to sell me a home security system. The man was dressed in khakis and had a polo with a name tag that I can't recall. The car didn't have a logo on it either. This should have been a red flag for me, but I figured that some people on the job didn't drive company vehicles. He handed me his card. I don't even remember the company he told me he was with, to be honest. Cue the friendly salesman giving me his pitch about needing a system, all the perks that would come with being able to watch the exterior of my house at any time. As quite a low-ranking military member, I knew I couldn't afford yet another thing, so my mind was working on trying to get this man to just go away. I even considered ninja chopping him, or whatever it is we Marines learn to do in hand-to-hand, just to get him to leave. But I'm sort of a passive person. I'm too nice? Nah, let's call it polite. I don't be rude to someone doing their job. I've been in customer service before, so I can relate. I tried politely declining his offer after he tried to show me some stuff on his iPad, but you know how persistent these types can be. I'll admit my own stupidity when answering his questions, giving out way too much information. Do you live alone? No, I live here with my wife and our 3 large dogs. At least I added in the large part. Her and her dogs hadn't actually moved in yet, and hers were just fat, although they were more vicious than my own good boy. But 2 women living together probably seemed like easier targets. I also mentioned being a Marine when he asked. He seemed a bit shocked, but it didn't seem to deter him. What kind of security system do you have? My dogs and me. Not the best answer I could have given. I wasn't exactly intimidating. I mean, I would be terrifying if I had a gun or something. I've been using them all my life, and I've never missed a target, alive or inanimate. If you would like to invite me in, I can show you the best places to set up some cameras. He mentioned more than a few times. Each time made me more and more creeped out, thinking that he was wanting to potentially rob me, not that I had much to take. Despite being a sexual assault victim, all I could consider was a possible burglary, and made sure he stayed away from my house whilst we talked. We were only outside for about 15 minutes total, me spending most of that time trying to politely get away from him and retreat inside. I wound up at my wit's end with social niceties though, and just walked away, leaving him standing alone in my front yard. I walked into my house and locked the door. He got into his car and left in a hurry. I thought nothing more of it. After some unpacking, I couldn't really do much. I had nowhere to put most of it. I ate some junk food and put together the futon. I got it all decked out with my fluffiest blankets, made sure the doors and windows were locked, and went to lay down in the living room for a while. Looking back, I'm not sure why I didn't put it in a bedroom. They all have blinds and the rooms take a bit of getting to. Perhaps I wanted to be near an exit. For some context, my back door is a double-glassed pane door. At the time, I didn't have curtains on it, but I did have blinds on the kitchen window. My kitchen, living room, and dining room are all connected, but there's a wall in the living room that I strategically situated my futon against, so I couldn't be seen by the back doors or the front door window. You can call me paranoid if you want. At this point, I'd been laying down for a few hours, when at about 11, my dog shot off the futon and went to the back doors. My dog is large and looks like a Rottweiler in coloring. He's a coonhound mix, but I guess city people don't have hunting dogs. But he'd never hurt anyone in his life. He greets strangers at the door with a tail wag and hardly barks. He stood back there for a bit and whined a few times. I ignored him. It must probably be a squirrel, right? But then he started growling, a sound that I'll never forget. It sent terror straight through me as I sat alone in the dark. I had only ever felt that fear once, when a mountain lion screamed and I realized I was powerless against nature, but that's a story for a different thread. The point is, these sounds are designed to scare you, and it petrified me. I was frozen and wanted to wimp out, to hide, to call the cops, but I realized if someone was out there, they'd for sure see my phone light and know where I was. So while my dog stayed stationed at the back door, I talked myself up just enough to move off the couch and investigate, still scared out of my mind. I slunk to the kitchen and grabbed a kitchen knife, one of the only utensils I had. Thanks, Ma. And crept into the kitchen window. I was squatting amongst the cabinets, so I couldn't be seen from any of them, bouncing a little, trying to gear up to peel back the blinds. My brain was telling me irrational things, horror stories that I had read come to life. To be honest, I was ready to bitch out. I'm not exactly a brave person. I was in communications, for fuck's sake, pretty far from any life-threatening battlefield situation. Well, not one that involves people at my house, anyway. In my one safe fucking space, my hideout, my protection from anything outside wanting in. I've always been afraid of home invasion. It stems from an incident when I was younger that isn't really worth mentioning further. Point is, if someone dares enter my safe space, well, it's not safe anymore. I had thought I couldn't be any more afraid in that moment, but as I peeked out, I saw a male figure in my backyard, and my heart jumped. He wasn't very far from the window I was looking out of. He was bold enough to not wear anything over his head, and I could see the blonde hair in the moonlight. It only took me a few seconds to recognize the security salesman in the dark. He was on the edge of my porch, watching through my back door, watching my dog. I jumped up quickly, climbed over the bar counter, and turned on the lights as I went towards the back door to let my still growling dog out, in hopes that he'd at least get rid of the man, if not injure him. No dice. As soon as the lights came on, he jumped onto the low part of the fence to safety, before my dog could even get off the porch. I didn't sleep at all that night. My dog sat on the futon with me, calm as could be, having done his job. The next morning I filed a police report, but I couldn't tell them his name or what company he was with, having lost the card he'd given me. They sent some patrols through the area, and I found out that all legit salesmen should have an ID upon request. That night I had 2 friends stay with me, ready for him to come back to either A, try to rob me or commit more nefarious acts, or B, try to scare me into some home security. He didn't come back after that, and I haven't seen him since either. My dog also hasn't growled like that since, but I'm terrified for the next time I'll hear it. So when I was 13, my parents sent me to an all-girls fitness camp to work on becoming the best version of me. Well, let's be honest here. It was a fat camp, and it was as horrible as you can imagine. Bad food, all-day exercise, and god-awful counselors. The camp took place on a college campus, where they had us sleeping in dorms of 2 girls per room. But I had high hopes that it wouldn't be a complete waste of a summer, as my roommate seemed like a great girl. Let's call her Mary. We had similar interests and the same style, really. It seemed like a perfect match. We would chat late into the night, planning our escape from the camp, bemoaning having to give up our cell phones, though secretly I had managed to sneak mine in, and talking about our families and how much they sucked for sending us here. To be honest, I was surprised that she was even at this camp at all. She was actually pretty fit, and her parents had signed her up for the whole summer, versus mine only sending me for 2 weeks. Only 2 days into being at this place, I was pulled aside by another girl who I had become quite close friends with. She warned me that Mary had a lot of issues, and the reason why she had been sleeping in a single for X amount of time was because no one else wanted to room with her. Well, I brushed it off, thinking it was just rumors and other girls trying to be mean. That day at lunch, though, Mary seemed rather mad at me, and for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why. So when I got a chance, I asked her what was on her mind. She ranted at me about how everyone was so mean, and was I going to leave too? She went on to explain how this one girl she was rooming with switched rooms because she made friends with this popular girl and made up all these lies just to be popular as well. And silly me, I believed her. We continued hanging out, and only now do I realize how she was keeping me from hanging out with anyone else. Near the end of my first week, the camp took us on a long walk over to the local pool. It was a big deal as it was super hot and only a once-a-week activity. Mary and I were both super excited to go. When we got there, we quickly claimed some chairs and left our stuff there. As Mary had been at the camp for several months, she didn't have to pass some stupid "can you swim" test that I assume is mandatory in most camp settings, so we were separated for about 20 minutes. After I passed with flying colors, "Thank you, swim team," I jumped into the pool and just started casually floating around. I heard her calling my name and saw her waving me over to the deep end of the pool. I swam over to her and asked her what was up, and she said she wanted to show me something. Next thing I know, suddenly her hands are around my neck and she's shoving me underwater. Now I'm a good swimmer, and I'm very capable of holding my breath for quite a long time, but never in my life had anything like this happen to me, and I panicked. I opened my mouth to scream. Luckily, before my mind had even processed what was happening, I had kicked up my legs and shoved her back, and made a desperate escape. Somehow I managed to swim away and pull myself out of the pool. As I caught my breath and began to process what just happened, I looked back at her. She was just staring at me, not having moved at all. I quickly grabbed my things and ran into the bathroom and called my mom. I was in tears as I explained what had happened, and it was very obvious she didn't even believe me. I stayed in that bathroom until we left to go back to the camp. I didn't leave the counselor's side the entire walk back. When we arrived back at the camp, I was pulled aside by one of the women in charge. She very rudely demanded I give her my cell phone. I, of course, denied having one, and asked why she thought I did. She told me that my parents had called about some assault that had happened to me, and they told them I had called. I quickly excused it by saying I borrowed a phone from a lady at the pool. Thankfully, they bought that. They told me that I would be moved to a new room the next day, and that I had to spend the night with Mary one last time. Furiously, I begged them to please let me sleep on the floor of another girl's room, but they insisted I was being melodramatic. As soon as I was left alone, again I raced to the closest bathroom and called my mom. That's when I learned the truth about Mary. I wasn't her second roommate, nor her third, fourth, or even fifth. I was the sixth girl to stay in a room with her. 3 of her roommates had left camp early, and the other 2 had switched rooms at the first opportunity. All 5 of the other girls had made allegations of violence from Mary against them, but the camp refused to do anything, and insisted she was just a troubled girl who wanted to make friends, or as they told my parents, well, she's had some issues in the past. That night I didn't sleep at all, and neither did Mary. She sat up in bed staring at me all damn night. I could feel her watching me, and I was terrified. I had my phone clutched in my hand with 911 dialed and ready to call any moment. I practically cried when the sun came up. That day I was moved to a new room in a different building and somehow managed to break my foot in the process, so my parents drove up and took me home with a cast on my foot to commemorate my time there. To this day, I've had issues from what this girl did to me, and I've never been able to live with roommates or make friends as easily. I'm a short, chubby 23-year-old woman from Italy. Back in 2019, I went to Ireland to get my C1 English certificate in a school in Belfast. The city was so chill and energetic. I would go out with my colleagues almost every night, walking around pubs and clubs all night long. At the time, I was also on Badoo, a dating site, and met a guy from the area. I spent various days with him, and we would either chill at the pub or simply go to his place and play on his PS4 and spend some quality time together. One evening, I had spent quite a lot of time with him at his apartment. I could not, however, stay for the night, so after a while I decided it was about time to head back home. We hugged goodbye, and I started making my way back to my building. It was 4 a.m., and the streets were completely empty, mostly because all the clubs were closed by now, and it was illegal to drink in public on the streets. Note that the city was very calm. It was almost crime-free, so I was okay walking on my own. That night, however, happened to be different. About halfway home, I noticed an Irishman in his late 20s walking slowly behind me on the opposite side of the road. I assumed he was probably just wobbling back home, like others would do after a long night of partying. I turned left and was still minding my own business when I heard a glass bottle breaking. I turned around and saw that the man had apparently thrown the bottle on the floor and started mumbling to himself. Slightly nervous, I sped up and turned right, taking a longer route just to make sure he was not following me. He took each and every one of my turns. It seemed he was indeed doing so. I stayed 2 months in that city, so I'd managed to memorize where to go and which areas were, in a way, the safest. Luckily, I managed to encounter a group of people just sitting and eating pizza after a night out, so I headed over to them and started chatting with them for a few minutes, trying to buy some time. I looked back, and the man had stopped walking and was just standing on the corner of the street, leaning against the building and staring at me and the group. He seemed confused and had a visibly upset expression. After moments of eye contact between each other, the other folks noticed the man as well, and they drunkenly told the weirdo to go away. On that request, he started screaming slurs and nonsense, calling me and one of them a bitch. He then went back to where he had been walking from. Throughout the weeks in the city, I didn't think too much of the event, and went on with my studies and parties abroad. A few weeks ago, however, I came across an article on the local newspapers of Belfast I was receiving in the mailbox. It was only then that I recalled that episode. A woman was raped and choked to death at night. Her body was found days later. The man found guilty of the event was the same man who had followed me that night. I don't know much detail about the case. Couldn't really find any online news about it. But reading that brief article made my skin crawl. No matter how safe a city can look, you might happen to just be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I realized just now how lucky I was, and decided to take a taxi or an Uber next time, instead of walking home on my own at night. Cautionary tale about giving strangers rides ahead. About 10 years ago, I was on my way to work when I made my usual stop at the Speedway to grab a Red Bull. I made this stop just about every day, so it was pretty routine for me. On this day, however, I was already about 15 minutes late for work, but whipped into the gas station anyway. As I got there was a clearly strung-out girl pacing by the entrance with a baby stroller. I assumed this lady was going to approach me when I got out of the car to ask me for money, to buy food. The Midwest is filled with dope heads, so I braced myself for the awkward encounter and headed in. What happened instead, though, was that the lady bolted in front of me with her flip phone and stroller in hand and started begging me for a ride up the road. I declined initially, but she just would not fuck off. I get past her, buy my Red Bull, and head out to my car. As I get into it, she reappears from behind and starts begging once again. This time she flashes a photo of her baby on her phone and tells me she just needs to be dropped off just a bit up the road. Fuck it, I'm already late for work, I think to myself. She hops in the backseat with her now clearly empty stroller and instructs me to drive towards the bypass, close to my work anyway. As we drive, though, she just keeps telling me to go straight every time I ask how much further it is. We're now well away from the city, and it's nothing but country roads. I lose my patience at this point, and very firmly tell her she needs to either give me an address or get the hell out of my car. She throws $3 in my passenger seat and begs me to turn onto this random gravel road. I turn down onto it, but the only thing I can notice on the road is a beat-up Corsica blocking half of the gravel path. Of course, I instantly pull off to the side and tell her to get the fuck out right now. She begs me to just take her down just a bit further to the Corsica, because it's her boyfriend and he has her kid. I tell her that if that's true, why can't he just drive down the road and pick her up? She texts on her phone for a second, and without another word, she hops out of the car. I'm officially sketched out, and flip a bit just to see in the rear view the Corsica hauling ass behind me. The lady has disappeared, and turning onto the bypass just opposite of me. I ended up calling in since I was running about 30 minutes late after all of this nonsense. My grammar might be trash, but I'm 100% certain I was about to be robbed by crackheads or worse. Between the fake baby photo, empty stroller, and shady dirt road Corsica, I was pretty shook for about a good week.